welcome to another episode of DevLab, the podcast where we go deep with engineers and tech leaders about what they're building and where the industry's headed. Today, I'm joined by Josh Hicks, a senior engineer at Jumpmind, creators of SymmetricDS, an open source data replication platform trusted by thousands of businesses out there. We talk career transitions, system scaling, and what engineers learn by working directly with customers. So, firstly, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Look, I think a good place to start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Jumpmind, and what your role is within that business?
Sure. Yeah. So I started my career off as a developer, working in architecture roles, development roles, a little bit of everything, support, testing. I knew actually two of the owners way back from when I started out of school. We had worked together at a similar consulting groups. Had a little history there and what they were going and what they were working with. And then they reached back out to me when they were ready to kind of get things off the ground. And at that point, I just freelanced. I was freelancing. And so that was a way for them to get me involved and also, get the company moving. So I had quite a few years of working with it early when we were getting it going at our first couple retailers, and then moved on full time couple years into it as things continue to evolve. Worked a lot on development, support, testing, a little bit of marketing at that point, and a little sales support. But probably in the last 10 years, moved primarily into more of a like technical sales engineering roles. It's been neat because it kind of seen the product evolve, the company evolve, and then I've also been able to get more customer facing. We're always kind of customer facing, but early on, it's still a lot more heads down time to try to get the product off the ground. And now it's really interacting a lot with the direct end to end customers and the problems they're having. So the role has started, as kind of a basic and heads down, grind it. And then, now we're still grinding, but now it's a lot more focus in a lot of different areas, a lot more customer focus and a lot more people involved on both sides. So
Fantastic. And I think that technical kind of sales role might not be the type of role that's super familiar to a lot of people out
yeah,
there. I think often we draw that distinction between the technical side of the business and perhaps the more commercial side of the business.
yeah.
And that's definitely something that we're really going to explore as we get into the podcast. But before we kind of come back to that and we start to think about that customer facing element of the role, you came to Jumpmind from the corporate side of things,
Mhm.
and you've also spent some time freelancing. What was it like to go from that kind of retailer side into the vendor side of things? What was that experience?
Yeah, rather unique. It was a nice life experience. I mean, for those out there that are trying to explore their career paths, it's very helpful because with the corporate mindset, you got some stability. You've got a big company usually, or somewhat stable company, hopefully behind you. So you're looking at what's best for that company, and you're generally focused on one kind of stack or one area of business, whatever that business might be. You're in one industry, generally speaking. Even though you're working on technology, there still is the ultimate business goal is to sell that industry that they're in. And then freelancing allowed me to explore some other industries a little better. So that was really interesting because I got to use the same technologies and the same background that I had, but using it across various industries and working with new people. That's a little different with the freelancing. You have to be able to kind of adapt quickly to new groups and new organizations and new ways of doing business because you're moving around a little and you're experiencing different cultures. And then going, fully on the software vendor side is really a full change because now you're not looking to, sell widgets of, like shirts and everything else as much as like a retailer might be. You're looking to really work on a pure software product that's going to try to help and solve problems. So it's kind of the full gamut when you go from kind of a corporate world to the freelancing and having to be dynamic and then fully on to the vendor space. So it's been quite a journey, and it varies quite a bit in all three of those aspects.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose really the crux of it is it just helps you empathize, I suppose, with
Yeah.
everyone you're dealing with, everyone that you're working with, because you can put yourself back in those shoes, right?
Yeah, clearly, like if you ever hear people, oh, you should always try to do a server hostess role because then when you go out to dinner, you have an experience of what that side is like. So it's a very similar approach. Like you've been on both sides of the fence and you understand what it's like to be needing a vendor to solve a problem versus now you're trying to sell a product to solve that person's problem. So it definitely makes it full circle.
Fantastic. Excellent. And as I said, we're going to delve into that a little bit later. I'm really excited to get your opinion on what unique perspectives engineering personas can bring to that customer experience. But a little bit before we do get into that, network is something that kind of came up when we were kind of prepping for the podcast. I know your network is something that's played a very important part in your career journey. And we've heard so many times, from all sorts of different angles, that networking is key in today's jobs market.
It
What
really,
advice would you give to tech employees out there that are looking, maybe to land a role, or maybe not necessarily land a role in the short term, but just looking to build that network? How do you kind of go about that?
I mean, I think it comes down to a core pillar. Like it's just positive relationships. I mean, you're working in IT, and this happens in every industry, but your deadlines, there's stress, there's failures and outages and long Saturday nights, and there can be some heated times, and you're dealing with a lot of personalities. You've got people that maybe are stakeholders that don't understand fully like the technical space and the problems. And then, you're dealing with technical people that want things done a very specific way, but maybe they're not driving towards the business need. And so there's a lot of potential headaches and different personalities. And it's really important to stay in that positive space because especially now more than ever, I mean, with all the social media, LinkedIn, and everything that's around, your relationship can carry faster than anything. You can be a rock star at what you do, but if you're not easy to work with, and if they're, it kind of sounds cliche, but it really, I mean, especially more than ever, and I think naturally the technology space lends to some difficult situations because you're like I said, you're up against a lot of deadlines, a lot of estimations that are not always true and don't always work out the way people want them to. So there's a lot of frustration that you have to kind of circumvent to keep that. It's a challenge, as anybody that's worked in the IT space probably understands fully.
Yeah, for sure. And is it something that you kind of, I suppose, proactively pursued? So do you see it more as something that happens organically in terms of maybe staying in touch with ex-colleagues and just making sure that, you're, as you say, like that friendly face around the workplace and that you stay in touch? Or is it something where you went and actually sought out particular communities, whether they're online or in person? Like what were the practicalities of
I guess my outside of life got a little busy, family, kids, and everything. I was actively early on pursuing a lot more groups and interest things and trying to get to developer conferences. I tried to make myself available to a lot of those whenever they were presented or present them to my employee. Like, hey, I'd like to go to this conference because that's a great way to network and you see people kind of out of their shell. And so taking on those whenever you can, especially if you can get a corporation to support it and back you on that, because it does provide benefit for them. So taking advantage of those, obviously with things like the LinkedIn and everything, you try to make sure when somebody sends you a message, try to be responsive, even if they're looking for a position and maybe you don't have one, but being timing is everything and being, it sends a big message that you're responsive when they are out, because you never know on your side when something might change and you may need to reach out to them because paths change so much, where one time they may be looking for a position and the next moment you might be interacting with them as a business partner and trying to sell the product. So things change so fast that you need to really be as proactive as you can for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And that's some advice I always give to kind of any juniors or anyone who's maybe just starting out. I think um, it's easy to kind of build people up and put them on a pedestal, but actually, a lot of people are very generous with their time, particularly if it is a LinkedIn outreach. And for once, you're not being sold something and there's not
Right.
kind of an angle to it, right? If it is just someone who's out there looking for some advice, looking for an opportunity, maybe to be introduced to someone else or just to tap into your knowledge of the company and, think about getting that extra little bit of insight before they go and apply or they go and speak to one of the recruiters. Like people are really generous with their time in those situations. And I always just encourage people to take that chance and send that message
Yeah, take advantage of what's available to you. Yeah, absolutely.
for sure. Excellent. So look, coming back to Jumpmind now. So since you've been at Jumpmind, the company has grown significantly. So how does that culture changed? I've been through a few different instances where I've gone from a smaller organization that's really scaled quite rapidly, and that's certainly one of the challenges. So do you feel like the culture has evolved, and how have you kind of kept the, I suppose, core values that have kept you within the business for so long?
Yeah, I think at the core, the culture has changed, but a lot of it stayed the same. I mean, we were primarily an engineer first company. I mean, we were built with with an engineering mindset, which can be good and bad. But like for the focus, the focus was to build a technology product that was sound. I mean, we had to have the integrity of the customers. You had to create that relationship that you're gonna as all software might have some bugs and whatever, but they need to know that you're there to work with them through it. So like we've been a very engineer focused group from the beginning, and that helped kind of form a little bit of that culture and that stability. We had to build a customer base that we could survive on. They essentially keep the lights on, and keep everything moving. Um, but now it's been great. We've kind of gotten over that hump. And I feel like we're a lot more in a growth pattern now. But having that core foundation where technology is still king and it still rules everything underneath. So you can't move something that's too fast and lose quality. So the key has been keeping the technology sound. Like again, I always like this. You're going to have defects and hurdles, and you're developing and you're involving more people. That just comes with bigger QA processes and the growth. But it's been really fun being in a growth standpoint now that we're engaging a lot more people, more customers, more industries, but we're keeping that same tenants involved on making a product that's got a lot of good qualities to it and is technology sound. So
Fantastic. Excellent. And look, we might have managers, business owners, all sorts of different people listening in. And I think one challenge businesses face is keeping, great engineers, great talent within the business. So what's the secret? What's kept you there for so long?
yeah, it's funny you say that because I do think engineers, they get bored.
Yeah.
And we new technologies come out and you're like, well, what is this that much different than this one? And I think some of them just emerge because people, they need new stuff and they need, new stuff to work with and new technologies to chase. A lot of times chasing a lot of the same problems, but finding new ways to do it. So I think it's important to recognize that something's not getting stale. I mean, there has to be a balance, because you have to have a productivity angle, but you also need to have something. Let's embrace new technologies. Let's encourage developers to explore them and see, are they really going to give a benefit, or is it just the shiny carrot, that everybody's chasing or something, and it's not a lot of traction to it. Because it takes time and effort to learn and new technologies or new products, and you really want to make sure that you're chasing something that's going to have some longevity and stick. But you want to encourage your developers to really push those boundaries, and engineers will also tend to get familiar with their ways. They're creatures of habit, and I shouldn't say they, we are, we find comfort in what we know, and so sometimes now some personalities drive for that, but some personalities want to keep on driving through the existing technology stack and not change from it, and that can be good and bad. But you at least need that ability as a manager, director, or whatever, to give your resources the ability to explore and evolve some of those while maintaining a level of productivity that keeps things moving, because there's some real benefit to it. But I think when it gets a little stale is when people might start to quietly start looking around, or exploring other options. So you want to make sure you understand what kind of resources you have, and the ones that are willing to get out and look and try new things, you want to give them those vehicles.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that definitely chimes with a lot of what I hear from other professionals like yourselves, when having these conversations. I mean, look, there's no silver bullet for 100% retention out there. People are going to want to move on and find new challenges, and that's a natural part of it. But in terms of making sure that you're not beneath the kind of threshold, it is that variation, those progression opportunities, those opportunities to learn new things or fix different problems, or maybe even take a horizontal move to different parts of the business like you have, right? Moving that focus away from perhaps a just engineering coding focus, whether that's into the sales side or more into, I don't know, business analysis or architecture or whatever else it might be, making sure that those pathways exist, I think is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So look, let's focus on SymmetricDS, right? This is a kind of your main focus from what it sounds like in terms of your work with Jumpmind. So just to remind those out there, SymmetricDS is an open source data replication platform. It helps thousands of businesses make real-time updates to their data. And look, one of the most important challenges that you'll find with data replication is when things go wrong. So let's get the skeletons out of the closet. Let's talk about those rainy days when things maybe don't go to plan. Because I think again the measure of a strong engineering team is not necessarily what do you do on a fair weather day, but how do you react when the storm hits? So can you tell us a little bit more about how you act when perhaps a weather related outage or something like that hits the system?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've because we actually are developing and also supporting our own product. We don't outsource the support, so you feel firsthand the pain. So you really do have to understand what a customer is experiencing, and then what it is to resolve it. And so over time, we've built in a lot of safeguards, and we've enhanced the protocol. A lot of times it doesn't have to, but a lot of times we're replicating between remote systems. So replicating databases that are geographically all over the place, whether it's countries at sea, all different locations, devices. So enhancing that protocol between them and to make it a lot smarter. I lost this. I need you to resend this. Like there's a lot of things that are happening underneath the hood of it, kind of on the unhappy path scenario. The happy path, like you mentioned, is great. Here's your data, load it, done, send the next one. And that's the progression. But as everything, there's new security scans and outages and weather patterns and latencies and unforeseen upgrades and just things that are evolving in the space around us all the time. So having that protocol layer that's been really enhanced and evolved to be smarter about telling each side what's happening, to do auto resolution. We know there's a problem. Why do we need to tell you how to fix it if we are able to take action? So simple thing like any kind of primary key, foreign key data that's missing, we can auto resolve, go get it. We've taken on we drive a lot of it with parameters that say I can kind of turn this gate on and off if I don't like this behavior. But we've gone down a path of trying to get the user out of trouble automatically and made some assumptions. So conflict resolutions, foreign key auto resolutions. We're just going to do that kind of stuff for you until you tell us you want it to behave a different way. Mainly because if you start dealing with high volumes and outage windows that might span hours, the backlog now is a big deal. And now you're chasing two problems. Now you don't have the immediate problem that we had some kind of disconnect. Now I've got 10 hours, 12 hours a day and a half, 2 weeks of backlog that is going to further the problem. So we've built a lot in to make some assumptions and to say we're going to keep things moving based on these criteria. If this happens, if that happens, you run into an insert and that data is already there, it falls back to an update. So things like that they're going to keep data moving to prevent the backlog. Log it, make a nice record of it, make it available to the users that these are how many conflicts we had, these are how many fallbacks we had, so that's all visible stats that we can present and show them, and we can make recommendations to avoid those in the future. But we've learned over time the backlog creates that second problem. So keeping that data, keeping everything moving and letting that system continue to do its thing is really beneficial for both sides, for us on the support and obviously for the customer and their data.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think the scale of the data that you're working with, I think also adds that extra layer of complexity. So that proactive approach that you're taking, but as you say, right, you can't predict all the changes that are going to come in, right? I think we've seen in the last 18 to 24 months the impact that AI has had, and I'm sure that in itself has led to new complexities. But taking that kind of proactive approach so that when you have to react, you've already kind of got the systems in place so that you can react quickly and you can kind of fix problems as they arise. Definitely sounds like the right way to go when you're working at the scale that you're working at.
Yep.
Fantastic. So look, let's talk about that scale, okay? So SymmetricDS handles up to 20 million changes per hour across 70,000 databases. So for anyone out there listening in, I'll just let that sink in just for a second. That's 20 million changes per hour across 70,000 databases. So what are the engineering challenges of building software that needs to operate at that scale?
Yeah, there are a lot of smart people. I mean, there's a lot of good engineers. It goes back to some of the core engineers that started the company. I mean, they built that on that foundation to solve these kinds of problems. Because, moving a couple hundred rows of data, we probably all have the skills to do that. So I mean, I can't deny that some of the owners of our group are some of the sharpest people I've worked with. So they've really taken that problem. We dove into some large retailers right off the get-go. So and you're really dealing now what you're dealing with too is the evolution of just data storage, how it's stored, the different networks, the speeds. There's seems to be, even though networks are faster, there's more scans that are happening. There's more interference, so to speak, and also people have taken for granted how cheap data is, so they want to move it everywhere. It's like it used to be, everything was kind of stored at a central hub, but now they're not getting rid of data. There's no delete, less deletes and less movement and all that. So it goes kind of back to what I mentioned before about the backlog. Like it's very critical to make sure that we fine tune a lot down to that lower level, and we do a lot of performance testing down to the microseconds and everything to figure out exactly where bottlenecks are along the way. We also have a feature in the tool. It's a customer snapshot. So as we're working with our hundreds of customers, they can send in these snapshots. We get a lot of statistics. What trends are happening and where there's patterns, and we can almost pin that down to where in the software was the bottleneck. And it shifts. 7 years ago, it might have been on the source side, and then it's on the transfer, then it's on the load, and then those all smoothed out. Now we're back to another bottleneck in the source. So we're constantly watching the metrics that are coming in from our customers, and looking at any kind of spikes and anomalies so that we can further regroup and rehash those again for performance. So, and there's a lot of vendor tools. When we're dealing with a lot of these vendors now, they're very aware of the complexity of this data. So they're providing tools that allow us to get at the data faster. So there's actually third-party tools now rather than basic SQL. There's a lot of vendor tools, and we're having to tap into a lot more of those. So it's a lot more API driven and leveraging what the vendors are also providing. Hey, if you want to get massive data from A to B or from your source to the cloud, there's now tools where you can leverage and hook into, and we take advantage of those when we can as well. So it's not a silver bullet scenario. It's a lot of complexities all over, but over time, scale, and I've seen a lot of customer environments, we're constantly trying to nail those down.
For sure. Yeah. No, makes total sense. And similar to the previous conversation we were having around those kind of failure events, again, it's we can't necessarily predict ahead of time. It's making sure that the monitoring is there, and as you say, you're looking out for those bottlenecks and then pushing them
Right.
down the funnel, and awesome. So look, we promised towards the start of the conversation that we'd get back to focusing on your work as a technical sales engineer, and it's something that really intrigues me because I think over the past 5 years we've done this podcast, I've maybe spoken to one or two people that really sit within this field. So I'm going to be learning a lot as well from you, I'm sure, today. So
Yeah.
could you tell us a little bit more about, what it's like? What does the role entail? What are the skills that you think you have to bring to the table to be successful in this type of role?
Yeah, I think the biggest change for me, like, you come with an engineering mindset and you're very focused on a problem and how to translate that into software language, or you're looking at algorithms. So the human interaction might be limited. It's enough to get your requirements, and then it's one-on-one, you and the computer. Like, how can I get this algorithm in place? And you're very focused on that, which is awesome. I still like that aspect of it. But when you're on the sales engineer side, it's a flip and rolls, because you really have to listen and gather information and hear what their problem is. And often we want to make it very technical, like right out of the gate. And you almost just have to understand where's the pain? Like what is, the more they talk and the more they explain, the more you listen and you try to understand without coming up with directly a solution. You have to kind of separate the engineer side of I got to solve this right now on this call, to really gathering a lot of information to figure out where exactly the pain point is. And often, if you're dealing with somebody that's even pseudo technical on the other side, they want to provide a solution for you. So you have to almost separate. In my opinion, I think it's important to not get down a path where they're giving you the answers to the question. Like I just want to hear exactly what your pain points are, what your problems are. I appreciate the recommendations and all that, but it kind of can muddy the waters a little if they start telling you how they want to do it, not just. And I think that's the real switch, is being able to now becoming the gatherer, and trying to take that and find out what the problem is. And then, I find it almost best to kind of separate. And then I got to kind of go offline and look at, what their problem is, what the notes were, and then either go back to my engineers or just, whiteboard with a couple people, like, how would we solve this? And we might come up with 5-6 ways, like engineers always do. So it's important then to kind of figure out, then you start layering in other things, cost, performance, and everything else. What's going to be the best fit for them? And then I kind of circle back with them and see, all right, well, here's some, proposals, recommendations. Here's where the product would fit. Here's where it wouldn't fit. And that's been another big pillar for our product and our company culture is we don't want to sell it to you if it's not going to work. We support it. It does us no good to force a product down, down your throat just to make a sale and then turn around and, it's just, it's a mismatch and it's a support nightmare. And, maybe and so identifying those gaps or lack, or if it's just a good fit, and being very upfront with the customer. And I think it can be a little scary. You're presenting out like, this is where we fall short or this is where we nail it. And a lot of times it's taken well. The customer really respects that. So and then they realize they're willing to work, or I give us, here, we don't have this, but this is what we could do to alleviate that, or what we could work towards. And so that's been a real benefit too, is not trying to just square peg round hole and just fit everything into one, but figure out exactly what would the solution fit, and how much of it, and what do we need to be upfront about and adjust. And so that's a different hat than some of the engineering roles, because you write an algorithm, it has to be all the way, all or nothing. It compiles, doesn't compile, or it solves the problem, or it doesn't. So sometimes when dealing with the human factor, it doesn't always work as well as it did in the software side.
Yeah, for sure. There's that gray element in the middle, right? It's not quite as black and white, and sometimes
Right,
that
right.
nuance. And as you say, maybe the tool solves 60% of the problem, and then you recommend a tool that might solve the other 40, or whatever else it might be. In terms of your day to day, and look, I appreciate often this is a really hard question to answer because I'm sure your day to day varies, but
Yeah.
how does the day to day differ from your kind of classic product engineering? Like, does it look any different? Are there activities and tasks that you're involved in now that are a whole world apart?
Yeah, I mean, my day to day is probably a little different because we're kind of in that mid range, small emerging company size, and so I am still wearing a lot of hats, with kind of sales engineer focus, but I still am in a lot of engineering calls to hear what's on the support face, dealing with marketing and sales, and trying to keep that social media presence with blogs and whatever. And I still do a lot of conferences. Sometimes we speak at conferences, so we're trying to put together that kind of thing. And then um and then there's just where's the product going. So there's some strategy, the strategy, and that starts to get a little higher level, with the leadership, and what are we going to need to take it to what's coming, and forecasting. And so my day to day might vary a lot more week to week. It's probably not so much during a day, but during a week. You might hit 6 or 7 of those things. One day, every now and then, if I'm lucky, I'll get a heads down and get the code. But some days might be heavy focused on strategy, or maybe we've got a real customer that's going to take some real thought, and we're really brainstorming and trying to put together a real good proof of concept for them. So it does vary quite a bit in our size organization, where we're still kind of differentiating different roles. But for me, it's exciting because it does provide that culture and change where you're not just locked in on one thing each day. So you're getting that variety.
Yeah. And surely your engineering team love it as well. Because in the same way a product manager can maybe be a conduit between an existing customer and the engineering team, and they can take that feedback and put it in terms that the engineering team are going to understand better, or perhaps frame it in such a way that's really going to get everyone off to a good start. You're that conduit between the business and new customers. And not to criticize any non-technical A out there, sales, the sales teams in all sorts of businesses do an incredible job, but just having that ability to translate things
Yeah.
must be such an asset.
Yeah, and I'll even bring engineers to the calls if I can on occasion so they can hear kind of firsthand. And then there's not that kind of that fear that they're going to have to interact completely because I can work with that. But it is good for them to hear what we're hearing versus when I just come to a whiteboard and start drawing stuff up and say, here's the problem we got to solve. And they actually can put a face to it. And so we found that's been really beneficial to start bringing the engineers a little bit, more engaged into that sales engineering role. Just it feels like they might have a little more stake in it because they start to create the relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. And then that's kind of one side of the communication, I guess. But then you can also flip that around, right? And so how do you balance, I guess, communicating the technical aspects of a problem to the more customer facing folks, to maybe those people that aren't
Yeah.
as au fait with that sort of those sort of technical terms? Like how do you communicate in that way?
A lot of analogies, I guess.
Yeah.
Do a lot of I one of our owners always makes fun of me because he always thinks I deliver everything in analogies, whether it's cars driving down the road or people like shopping or just because it is, you have to find a way to bridge what limitation or technical hurdle you're up against. And and I'll say even a little more so in the data replication space because we don't have always the cool product front end and you're just moving data, right? Like,
Yeah.
not a big, just solve this for me. Don't, and so a lot of times the business side, they just want to check a box. Data is going to move and we don't have to worry about it. And there's, it's not always that easy. So it can be a real challenge, like you mentioned, to get that information. How do we take this big technical problem and portray it in a way that this executive is going to understand it to sign off? And so, yeah, there's a lot of PowerPoints, demonstrations, visuals. That I feel the same old picture's worth 1,000 words. Anytime you can put something that's going to help them visualize it, because immediately the speaking aspect can be, you don't always know your audience. And so once you start talking too technical, if they're not there, they shake their head and nod, but you don't know if they're really getting them. So I find a lot of PowerPoints and visual explanations really help back the sales cycle and the engineering, because you're right. You got to get those stakeholders to understand what it is that you're trying to solve. And that can be a real disconnect when you start talking tech and, they're, up here. So, but sometimes a couple pictures, man, they'll pick it up quick. So it just does help bridge that quite a bit.
Yeah, 100%. I'm big fan of analogies as well. I do a lot of the technical training within the business. And again, whether it's a restaurant for front end and back end, whether it's all sorts of different analogies that just help to drop things in. The kind of creating a physical building for
Yes.
architecting a system and just all these little things. And it's really nice when you see the penny drop moment or you see the light bulb.
Right, right. You
Now
can
we're on the
tell
same
when they get it. Yeah,
page.
you can tell. You can tell.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
It's like, yeah.
Uh-huh. It's pretty obvious when it starts to switch.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And yeah, look, I think it's a really good description of the technical kind of sales engineering role. I think everyone out there is perhaps a little bit more enlightened as I am. It definitely sounds like you're almost like a bilinguist within the business, right? You're talking to two sets of people that don't always understand each other, and you're there to kind of translate
It
and
is. It is. It can be a fun challenge and it can be a headache. It's just how you embrace it every given day.
yeah, for sure. So what's been the most surprising aspect of kind of making this move after spending years in the engineering side? Like, is there anything that really took you by surprise?
Well, it's kind of that mindset shift. Like that was the kind of and that didn't evolve right away. Like that took some learning, some pain, where you still are trying to force the engineering mindset. I've got to have A, then B, and it. You're thinking almost Boolean logic while you're talking to people, and you can't get them down to every little nook and cranny that you're trying to get to. And so flipping it around to kind of just, hey, tell me your problem. Like you talk to me about things, and then I can kind of like you mentioned the bilingual. Then it's like you translate it kind of after, like let them do the comfort talking that they are familiar with, and just absorb it, listen, understand it, and then try to translate it later. Because I found when I was trying to ask the questions, they didn't quite know what they were asking, or I confused them, and we were hitting dead ends. And so that's been a real, that's been a multi-year experience to try to learn the best ways of doing that. But that is where you go from the engineer talking to the non-technical. It becomes a real gap, and it can be frustrating because then both sides can, why don't you understand me? Why don't you understand me? The bilingual is a great analogy, because I mean, imagine going to a foreign country and you try to order food off the menu, and neither side can quite get where they need to be, and then they bring your food out and it's something you didn't order. It's like,
Yeah.
and
Even
I
the
feel like it
detail,
could be that.
yeah, like maybe it's, I don't know, the right protein, but there's just like, I don't know, you ask for not this, no mayo or something like that. Is right. It's that little bit where the devil's
Right.
in the detail, and it changes the dish entirely. But it's one ingredient and it's almost there. So yeah, for sure, I think definitely makes a lot of sense. Look, my next question was going to be around like what advice you would give to any other engineer that was looking to make this transition. And it sounds like part of it would just be kind of be patient and bear with that process. But is there anything else that really stands
I,
out?
yeah, I think the listening aspect is big, because engineers really want to have answers. They want to fill in those blanks, and I think you really need to get a lot of information. You're going to get it in different areas and different pieces, and they're going to, people are going to come at you, and there are going to be different priorities and everything they're coming at you with. Especially if you have multi people on the call. If you have 3 or 4 stakeholders, it seems like they all have different agendas and what they think is important and what they think will be a problem. And like I said, also separating the how. Like I don't necessarily tell me how to do the technical side, like, or my engineer, like, just present me with what your problems are, what the hurdles are, where are your gaps, what is, maybe you got a product today, what is it not doing well, what is it, what are your pain points. And the more that you listen and just let them explain all that, take great notes, and you, doesn't mean you don't ask questions. Certainly there's some questions. I can see engineers overwhelming the conversation. They want to get down to every little thing that they have on their agenda, which isn't terrible, but sometimes you don't get the information that you need. So I think if you are looking at transitioning from an engineering role to that sales, that it's a big piece is to listen and to let them speak, and to ask the questions around the problem and understand the problem. And then you can take that information. I would kind of whiteboard it and let your free thinking take it back to your engineers and come up with some solutions. And maybe it's 2, 3, 4. And then you kind of pro con through it and figure out which ones. Some may have this cost, it's here, and some might be a performance, and what's important to them, cost or performance, and, or, time. So there's different elements that drive all of this. So trying to solve the problem on that first call is not usually a good outcome. It's really, you're really good to information gather, find their pain points, because if you solve their pain points, you've done the job. If you can deliver something that addresses their biggest concerns or their biggest current issues, you're going to have success.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, one thing you could do as an engineer is maybe starting to speak to
Yeah,
product managers and product owners and people like that within the business, right? Because that's a big skill that
absolutely.
they've had to develop as well. And really start with asking them, okay, how do you go about discovery? How do you go about, planning out a project?
If you have any existing engineers, tag along. I mean, we're naturally kind of, I will try to grab some of our engineers on occasion to sit in on mine, because then they kind of can firsthand see. And I've had engineers even come to me after a call and be like, I never thought or that's not how I interpreted what they were talking about. I go, I know. That's why I didn't either in 20 minutes into the call. But the more they spoke and talked about the problem, then, it started to get clearer. So, kind of that shadowing, like if you can shadow a situation, or like you mentioned, going to the project managers early, especially if that's something, a career path you're looking at, it's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Look, we're going to round things out, looking ahead to the future. So thinking about emerging technologies or trends, like what do you think is going to have the biggest impact on data replication over, let's say, next 5 years? We can put whatever horizon on it you want.
Yeah, I wish I knew, because that's what I'm chasing. But certainly the cloud is a big player, not going away. It's interesting for us because we're having to constantly evolve and working with the cloud. But also, it's also interesting to me to see even the formats of data. I mean, you see the XML was the thing, and then JSON was the thing, and now you got Parquet is coming along. These data scientists and engineers just keep coming up with optimal ways to structure and to store and to optimize. And I think you're seeing specialization. I think data used to be, let's put it all in what we call a database, a relational big database or a mainframe, or, how back you want to go, how far back you want to go. And now you're seeing more like specialization, especially with AI and things like that. Like different types of data and different usages of data can go into different areas. Like you have analytics space, you have, a transactional space, OLTP, and so like you need to have your data in specialized areas for what it's going to be used for. Not all data is the same. Historic data doesn't need to be stored, maintained, the same way as transactional live data. And how much data do you retain, and what do you throw away? And then you got governance, and you got, privacy. So, I mean, really understanding and not just calling all pieces of data the same, and the understanding that they're all not going to be stored the same, that we are now specializing in, not in industry and in types of data, and how we are using it, how we are accessing it, is really, who can keep up with those is really going to, be relevant, because you really, understanding the specialization that's happening. There's different costs involved, especially, managing historical data and storing it where you're not really accessing it, versus running heavy, analytics on it is going to have different costs, and, what data you store in what spaces. So that I think that'll be interesting. I think that continues to evolve, and how people continue to specialize it and find ways to kind of chop it up and use it and maintain it.
For sure. And I think, we think, mentioned AI already, you've kind of just touched on it there, but, a lot of these LLMs, a lot of this, this kind of burgeoning approach we've seen to kind of utilizing data is really only as good as the data that it's based on, right? And the better that data is structured, the easier it is to query, the easier it is for the AI to actually understand what's relevant, what's not, and what's up to date and what's not, the better that these models are going to get, right? And the better that the AI solutions are going to get.
Yeah, and accuracy. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many customers we deal with where we're starting to delve into the space of reporting how much and what and where, how many inserts, updates, and deletes are happening per table, and in what time of day. And so they start to look at their data and say, what? Why? Like they don't even know where their data is being generated from. And then they start to question the accuracy. And we can't always look at that, because we're just, we're pipelines moving stuff. But like it starts to expose maybe problems that were always there, and maybe have inconsistencies or inaccuracies in your data. You can do all the analytics you want, but like to your point, if you got an AI model built on top of inaccurate data, you're not necessarily ahead of the game. There'll be a
Yeah.
lot of that governance that'll take place as well.
Yeah, 100%. And we're right at the start of these things. So yeah, it's going to be incredible to see how things develop over the next few years, for sure. Josh, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and all of your experiences. Before we do wrap up, is there anything we haven't had the chance to touch on? Anything else you wanted to kind of share with the listeners out there?
No, I mean, yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It's great when we can get out and speak to everybody. Be sure to take a look at the product, jumpmind.com, and we got the commerce solution, the data replication solution, and we got a handful of engineers here waiting to help you out. So that's my sales engineer's little pitch on the end for it. But yeah, definitely check us out, and we'd be happy to see if we've got a good fit for you.
Yeah, 100%. Would definitely encourage anyone out there listening in that this has piqued their interest, and if they feel like they have a need, or perhaps want to take Josh up on his offer earlier. Any advice for juniors out there? Maybe anyone considering to make this move into a similar role. We'll make sure in the description for the podcast that we've got all the relevant links to check out Jumpmind, and also to get in touch with Josh himself. Yeah, Josh, thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So that's it for another episode of the DevLab podcast, brought to you by HackerJob. Today's episode, as mentioned, was with Josh Hicks. Subscribe wherever you're listening in. And if you're a tech professional looking to explore your next opportunity, HackerJob is a platform behind DevLab, connecting engineers with great companies. Check out the podcast description for all the relevant links on ourselves, as well as Jumpmind and Josh. And thanks to everyone for listening in. Bye-bye.